first-time caffeinated folks? Right on. Cool. We do have a lot of familiar faces. Well, thank you for coming. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jay Farrakane. I started Caffeinated quite a while ago. We were offline for a little bit due to COVID and things like that, but we're back and having great guests like Dan. This is a First Friday event, so if it's your first time here, next month, First Friday, we're back with another great guest, and she's actually here, Parisa. Raise your hand. There she is. So awesome designer, local and part of CU. So just a couple of, we can't do this event. I know it feels like I do lots and lots, but it wouldn't mean anything without our sponsors. Big thank you to TDA, the Coffee Ride for giving us coffee, Buck Ross folks for recording this. If you ever want to catch it or you miss an episode, you guys can always check us out on YouTube, Vimeo. I think it's even now on Spotify. We're like worldwide. It feels amazing. Month of Modern, Pro Photo Rental gives us all our gear. We even have our own title track these days from Snappy Little Numbers. And then our newest sponsor, thanks to them, City of Boulder Office in Arts and Culture. But that's all the stuff that leads us up to. Hi, Dan.
Hello. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Today we have Dan Lehman of QRS Studio, or QRS, is it QRS Creative or Studio?
Creative.
Yeah. Okay. I've known about your work for a long time, and I would say if you ask Dan what he does, he'd probably tell you he does brand identity, illustration, lettering, and packaging, and I'd tell you he does them all really well. Just being a designer illustrator, I think you bridge out a lot far beyond just those two kind of somewhat narrow categories. And I bet if I bring up a slide like this, somewhere in here, us being design creative folks in the Front Range, you've probably seen his work somewhere. You've probably eaten at these places or bought things from these guys. And there's just such a fun, unique Dan style, if you ask me, about everything. I think one of the things that I wanted to talk to him about was, one of the first times I ever saw your work or really recognized, I think I knew you because we all knew Good Apples people and all that kind of stuff, but was you started getting some traction on your kind of tribute to Wes Anderson. I don't know how many of you folks have seen this, but I was really interested in starting here because I think it does point to so much of how you got started and your foundation and things like that. When we started talking about your talk coming up, this is one of the entry points I used, and it reflected so many things. There's so much detail and things like that. But how did you get started into the project like this? And I'll kind of leaf through a couple of these because they represent different films, but they have palettes and vibe and all that kind of stuff. And I'm fans of all these movies. But how do you start into something like this, and what keeps you kind of going on it?
So this whole project started when I saw the Grand Budapest Hotel film in theater in Denver. And after I saw I should have put it in the deck. After I saw that film, I just felt compelled to do a ton of illustrations from the film because it had so many interesting visual components to it. And so I did something like this. It was the first one I did, Grand Budapest, just maybe 24 illustrations. And then I thought, I want to share the work. What's a good way to do that? And I thought I'll make a pattern. So I posted the pattern. Then I had a former classmate from college reach out to me who worked in the fashion industry. And she told me, if you want to make your pattern better, do it a different way. Specifically, she was saying, change it to a half drop repeat, which means you go from a horizontal and vertical grid, like tiles on a floor, you switch it to bricks. So you take one tile and it goes over and halfway down, and it makes it more interesting. So on this pattern, you can actually see the little newspaper van is on a diagonal. So on a grid pattern, everything is always repeating just vertically and horizontally. So that was a cool little tip that she gave me. And after I figured it out, I became obsessed with making patterns. So the people that have known me for the last 10 years have probably seen a lot of patterns through the years. And this just became a series that I did where every time there's a new movie, I will do a new pattern. This one's Isle of Dogs. And my goal is to do the full back catalog. So I still would need to complete about 4 of them to do all of the current
When
movies.
you get into something like this, you mentioned that, you know, like you kind of had like, let's say the first one you get into like 24 drawings. Do you kind of have a preset number, or like when you get into build this, do you have to make fill?
This was one of the most complicated ones. It's probably like 40 illustrations. No, I go through the movie, and every time there's a object that I feel is part of the story, and it could be something super minor that's not like a big part of the story, but if it's visually interesting, I will just do a little sketch and then eventually turn it into a finished illustration.
That's what I think what was interesting too when I started looking at these. There's this like kind of micro, macro, all at a glance. You can kind of see the whole movie, but then there's these just random little details of like phrases that somebody said in that very Wes Anderson understated kind of vibe. But as you head into this, you know, one of the things that we talked about in the lead up too is I have this recurring thing when you talk to creatives. A lot of times you find out that the difference between either getting started or where they're at now is you can just kind of articulate why you're doing what you're doing versus when you got started. When you were young, who were some of your influences and you were kind of finding yourself emulating?
Absolute biggest influence on me was MC Escher, and it's still true to this day. Obviously, he is famous for the tessellations, and even in elementary and middle school, I was trying to draw my own tessellations. I actually have in this bag here a bunch of my old sketchbooks and some of the early stuff, if I can find it.
You guys want to see these after the talk. It's cool how detailed they are. They're super cool.
So one like this from 2007. Here's an example of tessellation. And back then I was just like, you know, not even in art college or anything yet, and I was just doing it for fun. Oh yeah. Here's another crazy one of just like machine parts. Jay wants to see the one with demons.
It's fun to see.
Here we go.
Like, you know, like your style is, there's like, I think like an optimism to a lot of it, and it's funny to see, you know, you do demons, so that's why well, and it was really interesting too, because I think that one of the things that, you know, when you're working on something like this and then this ongoing project, we've talked endlessly in our series about the importance of like personal projects and getting you other work. But I think there's also this notion that seems to be another recurring theme of like being creatives, we just sometimes have to get things out.
Yeah.
Does this represent kind of one of those things for you?
Yeah, I was actually just talking with Peyton earlier before the talk about another thing that the pattern project then spawned me learning how to sew, because I found out that there's a website that you can digitally print artwork onto fabric. So then I've always thought that flags were really cool, and I was like, what if I could make my own flags with this artwork on it and then sell it? So I started printing the fabric, and I bought a sewing machine on Craigslist, and I started to prototype flag designs. And
like a nation flag?
No,
sort of standard for yourself.
So in this case, this pattern would be on the back of the flag, and then the front of the flag would have like a massive illustration of the wolf with the hand in the air.
Yep.
So it was like, the idea was Wes Anderson fans would have like a more interesting wall art than a poster.
Yep.
But in learning how to do all that, I realized that it would have to be like over $300 for a flag. So I still have a few of them, but they're not for sale.
It's interesting that you because I would say this is like, you know, a series of illustrations, but you call them patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, when I share the work, I will show some of the things independently, but I like the pattern format because, like, I call it a story pattern, because anyone who's familiar with this movie, Fantastic Mr. Fox, they can just kind of scan around, and if you know the movie well, you're going to be able to more or less see something and know what scene it was from, and then it kind of takes you through the whole movie again. That's kind of the intention.
So I wanted to kind of bring up some of the stuff, you know, like it's always important to know where someone came from, and if we kind of move into the world of like getting started, it was funny to like bring this up, and you kind of built me some slides that said, hey, here's some of my early work. I think one of the things that when you it's important for creatives to always look back at where they've kind of come from, and I guess building on that idea of, usually when you're at a certain more mature place in your career, it's not that you're doing vastly different work, you're just able to articulate why you're doing what you're doing. And so when I brought this up, I could see tones of you in here, but what do you think the biggest difference is between what you're doing today and like where you got started?
So just as a reference point, this artwork represents where I was maybe 5 to 7 years ago. So it's not super far in the past, but what I find interesting in this spread is that some of these things, I would still do them the same way. So I was well on my way at this point to get where I am now. But then some things like the fruit illustrations, I did those in Illustrator, and I'm really happy with how they came out. But these days I would probably do it on the iPad, just because I think I'd probably get the textures that I want better.
Because the tools have evolved too,
yeah,
right? Like even in
totally.
that short amount of span, I think we were talking, you use Procreate quite a bit, right?
I do
Depending
use,
on the project.
Yep, it depends on the project and the client and the style, but I just used Procreate last week to make a illustration for a client, and I enjoy using it.
But it's kind of fascinating because like that tool, when this work was happening, wasn't even available.
Didn't exist, yeah.
So.
And then the mug on the lower right for Ozo, that's one where I look back on it and I'm totally happy with it, and I would probably do it really differently if I got that assignment today. So that's kind of how I feel about this work. It was just part of the journey, and I've progressed in a lot of ways since then, but I don't look back on this and want to keep it hidden away.
Right, and I
junk
think that's
drawer.
funny. We talked about this even with Steve during his talk about typography, and one of the things that you have to realize when we make images that are out there, or even things that we write copy with and things like that, fonts, they're contextual, right, to the period when they were created.
Yeah.
So like you saying, it's refreshing to see that you're not like, oh, let's hide that away. I mean,
Yeah.
Steve let me show curls, so and that had an application, right? So, and I think one of the things that stood out to me the first time I ever met you and we really got to talk about design is that, and you were a different person than you are now, because you were like on crutches and you had this thing and you had your book, and then you set up like your space for us to like have our talk. And I'm like, oh, this dude has a process about like everything he does. But I think your process really is very interesting, and especially in a modern, well, what we kind of like contemporarily see the creative process looking like this day. Sketching is still a big part of what you do.
Yeah, this is a project from 2 summers ago, I think. Dribbble, for those not familiar, is a portfolio and kind of a social site all in one. And I had been using their platform since 2011. So it was a huge honor when they commissioned me to do these 12 badges that they gave to their employees. At the time, they had just acquired Creative Market. So there's some Creative Market stuff in here as well, and that grew their employee base a lot. So they made things like t-shirts and stickers and beach towels for their employees. But yeah, on the left, I think people are oftentimes surprised at how rough a rough sketch can be. But if you look at the examples here, you can pair most of them to the final product, and you can see the composition and the concept stayed the same. It's just the details that changed. And the value of, for me, the value of being able to do rough sketching like this is you get good ideas and bad ideas just out of your system early on in the project. And another thing that was really lucky with this client was the CEO of Dribbble was able to look at these crusty sketches and approve concepts without me having to even vectorize anything for a first round. So that was really lucky. So, some clients struggle to see something like this and imagine
He's
what.
He's a designer, right? No? Isn't the founder?
I'm not sure. Zach. But yeah, so that was really lucky because I I have, I think, 4 pages of sketched ideas. Some of the ones here didn't get used, like the poodle that says bring good vibes. And you can see for try new things, I had 2 different concepts. They liked the parachute. So yeah, that's normally part of my process to do a rough sketch.
Well, and I think of the, I actually help kind of mentor some of the brand creative that happens in the CMCI studio where we're sitting today. And a lot of times I feel like some younger designers these days are terrified of sketching because I think it gets lost that they want, I think the belief is a sketch should be looked at and almost representative enough that it feels like a piece of art.
Yeah.
Where really the value of a sketch is, like you said, it's to get an
an idea
out.
Yeah.
And we've been doing this far longer than we've been doing this, but I see so many designers go straight to blocking shit in a digital program.
I think the other fear would be with young people would be that they think they have to be a good artist or illustrator, right. But sketching is not about fidelity. So yeah, I would definitely, and like I said, getting bad ideas out is really important. Like most designers with experience, if you have a new client project, the first 5 things that pop into your head are going to be the most obvious solutions, and any of them might be viable. Like your first idea could be a really good idea, but getting them all out of your system, that process typically sparks a new idea that you wouldn't just think of by brainstorming or just sitting there wanting to think of something.
Is your process fairly fixed in terms of, I just got a commission, I'm going to start working on, say a set of badges. Is it, hey, I got to do this first? I personally have never thought of myself as a very process-oriented person, but I can tell you I do have a set of steps I must go through to get to some end result, no matter what I'm working on. But it's more like an accordion; it can like squeeze or contract.
Sure,
those kind of things.
That's definitely my approach. I think I go through almost all the same steps, and I'm still formalizing some of those things. Like as an independent designer, I definitely took my sweet time getting to the stage of actually writing up contracts. So now that's part of my process where it's like I don't start the project until I have a down payment and a signed contract. So that takes more time, but once you get into the routine, it's something that you have to do. And I just thought of something else, and we didn't talk about Good Apples yet, but that was the first studio I worked at. Both of my former bosses are here.
I haven't seen these guys in so long. It's cool to have you back.
And
they've been guests too. So.
I now use the same file structure that we used in the office. So in every client folder, there's 0 assets, 1 files, 2 final art, and then 3 like communication stuff like that.
You will actually write the word final on something.
Yep.
I never will. Production file.
V1.
Yeah, okay. V1 final. So I wanted to bring this one up because, and you alluded to it in your discussion about the patterning for the Wes Anderson stuff. So this was really interesting because you were just taking me through some sketches, and I loved where this is going, and I know that you have a tie to like doing some work in fly fishing and things like that. This is a logo for a restaurant in Vail?
Correct.
Yeah. And what is fascinating, you guys will probably know, in the layout, there's comments in there. And I thought it was, for independents, we often work so isolated that you kind of leverage some interesting platforms. And it's one thing that you ask for opinion, but you actually really implement it more often than not. Like you did it in the West End.
I'm trying to.
Kudos, because I
more
can't
so.
do it.
Yeah.
Like, nah, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
It's really harmful to be in a silo. I mean, like you have to be able to trust your instinct and be confident, obviously, but on this project, it was tough because I explored 4 different directions right off the bat. And for me, I didn't feel confident I was leaning towards one of them, but I was not feeling confident, like this is the best one. And I thought there's no harm in soliciting some feedback from the community. So on the right-hand side, we have Instagram, and in the middle column is Dribbble, and the third platform that I used that's not here is Reddit, which that one is wild because that's like people from all over the world, whereas these 2 are people that I kind of know who they are. Some of them are in the audience, I'm sure. But it was actually super helpful. I was able to gain insights on what people thought was the best, and most of the people were designers, so they gave reasons. Like I really liked it's blocked on that screen, but this comment here from Matt, he pointed out that the option 2 and option 3, the fins on the back start to look a little bit like mountains, which for veil is a really nice tie-in. So I was like, cool. I was not thinking of that because I was just drawing a fish, but that's one of those nice little Easter eggs that you can mention it to the client and be like, hey, you can always tell people that there's like mountains hidden in the logo. It's like, why not?
So
still a work in progress, but yeah.
Big changes here, directional change, all that kind of came through.
Okay, so on the feedback, if you go back to the previous slide, option 4 got, the two that got the most was option 2 and option 4. Option 4 got twice as much positive feedback from the community. So I showed those 2 options to the client and I said, here's what other designers think. If it's up to me, I would recommend going with 2 because it's a more unique, like there's so many illustrations of jumping fish. Mm-hmm. I said option 2, it's balanced, it's unique, and it would function nicely as a restaurant logo. And he ultimately did go for that option, so I was happy with that.
Yeah, it was interesting because we even had the discussion like in tattooing, there's the direction in animal faces has meaning.
Oh yeah, so that was another thing that came up from the feedback is all the fish I drew were facing to the left, which for some reason is the way I always draw fish. And at least half a dozen people or more said the obvious thing, you should face it to the right since we read left to right and it's seen as a positive direction to go forward, not backward. So it was like, boom, easy decision. I didn't have to be like, oh, I can't take feedback or I need to do it my way. It was just like, yeah, obviously if there's a word mark right above it that you're reading left to right, it makes perfect sense. So I was like, done, I'll do that.
Well, and you're a big user of Dribble and things like that too,
yeah.
Right? Like you seek feedback out there and you kind of use it for the peer tool aspect of it where I think now it's become somewhat of an additional portfolio for clients to find you.
Oh yeah, Dribble is definitely my biggest lead generator. And I think that it's probably their SEO that I have to thank. I think people are just typing in like something like bear logo, and then I've probably posted like 6 different illustrations of bears on Dribble, so I'm going to be somewhere in the top thing when they search for it.
I wanted to bring up this project that you're currently working on. This is still current, right? Or just
the artwork is finished. It'll eventually be a packaging project, and I'm waiting on the client to pull the trigger on that.
Well, when we started talking about this one, I know you were proud of the work, and we'll look at some of the more finished, kind of unbranded work, if you will. But it was funny because I think your thing on this one was I had to find the right reference for it, and I do think that's a big part of design that often gets overlooked too. I often talk about like the hardest part of design is, it's doing the research, it's getting ready to paint the house. Always takes longer than painting the house,
Yeah.
So like finding all those things, and even in the degree of like you not being able to find that Komodo dragon in the right position, it forced you to do a couple of things where you were like, okay, I need to construct the reference. So that was kind of ironic to me that you're like, I have to make the thing I want.
Yeah. Well, and could we go to the next slide and then come back? So this is the final art. The concept was, the product is called Komodo, and it's a keyboard product. So if you look into some of the details, like in the middle of the neck, you can make out some keys. There's also some PC, like custom PC parts in there, like the little GPU fan thing and all the cords and stuff. So I knew the concept that I wanted to do. A Komodo dragon that looks kind of like a mech warrior, like living in some dystopian post-computer land or something. And the concept was approved. So then, if we go back, the rough sketch is on the top left. That's what was approved. So then I found a ton of source material on mech warrior things, which I was vaguely familiar with, but I've never done a deliverable with this amount of detail and with these kinds of things. So I found a lot of reference material on computers and stuff too. And so after the pencil sketch, I redrew it in Procreate. That's that red outline in the middle. But since Procreate is a raster-based program, doing something like a cord that has ridges on it is tough because you'd have to draw every single little thing unless you had a custom brush somehow. So I ultimately then redrew everything a third time in Illustrator, because in Illustrator I could make, like, the one cord hanging out of the mouth is like a corded protector cable.
Woven.
It's like woven, yeah.
Yep.
So I was able to just make a brush, and then I can have a live stroke with the brush applied to it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how many hours went into this early stuff, but it was a ton of effort just to get to the final product, which was going back to Procreate to do after I got everything dialed, then it was back to Procreate. So I'm not positive that was the most big-brained process, but it worked for me, and I was able to move forward at every step.
Does this kind of like style or process represent more where you'd hope to go, or you're like, dude, like it was such a mess, I don't want to do that anymore, or
I'm neutral. I'm really happy with the final result, and I was worried in the beginning. I was like, I've never drawn anything like this as far as the subject material. So I was like, is this one of those things where I should subcontract? I should just find someone that draws this stuff every day and just subcontract it out. And actually Len, who's here, illustrator friend, he convinced me that, he was like, yeah, you can do it. So I was like, okay, yeah, I could probably do it. And it was definitely a time-consuming project, but in the end, I was able to figure out everything that I needed to.
And that brings up, you're really forthcoming about talking about like business and contracts and that kind of stuff. When you judge a project like this, is it in the back of your head hours?
Yeah, everything comes back to hours. I probably severely underestimated this one, but
you do it for the love of the game.
If I love it at the end of the project, I've learned something, so I could price it differently next time. And I don't regret it because I'm really happy with the work, and this work is going to get me more work. So, yeah, I don't dwell on that kind of thing.
So I think the arc that we were aiming for with you is, I think it's really important for everybody to see just the stuff you've done. Like, it's really interesting to see what you're working on these days, because I think in some of these examples, and the most interesting thing is you've worked on Ozo
since 2014.
Two bookends, right?
Yeah.
With Good Apples, and did you carry it through?
No, Justin took the reins for 2 years probably.
Yep.
So and it's I think this would be like the third or fourth version of their packaging system. So yeah, for this project, I transitioned some stuff that I had designed or illustrated initially, and I put some of it on the back burner. Some of it still exists, like the coffee plant pattern, the bear illustration, and the original logo, which Justin created. That stuff has all been there for a while. The logo's been there the longest. But my goal was to kind of, as with any brand update, my goal was to not alienate any of their current customers, so it should still feel like Ozo. And two of the things that helped that is a lot of color and the use of Futura. That's always been, as far as I remember, always been the
core foundational
product name font that's been used. So I was able to keep those elements, but kind of take it in a little more minimal direction than it had been in the past. And they have so many products that my biggest goal was, if there's a shelf of all the products, I want that product name to always be like exactly at the same place in the same font, so that regular customers can easily come back to the thing that they normally buy, and new customers, they might be unfamiliar with Ozo, but they might know that they like Guatemala. So, with a well-designed font, you can just scan and easily find stuff.
Well, I think it was interesting when we started talking about this, that you had in the back of your head when you started revisiting some of this stuff, and not that you were like taking the blame or falling on your sword or anything like that, but you were kind of, you made this comment that you're kind of somewhat admitting that it needs to be fixed.
Sure.
And my reply was maybe just the world around it, because 2 years in a like consumer setting is a long time actually. So the context around it was changed, but I think you were kind of like doing this thing where you're taking these core concepts, fonts, color palettes, but then you were doing that level up of like, oh, they've evolved.
Yeah.
What's it become today?
Yeah,
That's the interesting thing.
And since I started working with them, those two products on the right are things that they never had before. So it was an entirely new form factor. So yeah, to your point, they're obviously always growing and evolving as a brand, and they were welcome to try some of these new looks. Like every piece of typography, minus the bear, which is kind of a one-off with lettering, but otherwise all the typography is Futura now from Monotype. And what's great about that is it's a super family and it's variable. So it was a dream for building out this product line because, so like on the cold brew coffee, using the display weight, which a lot of people are not familiar with. It doesn't look like Futura, but it is Futura. But something like that was so perfect to have a more condensed weight that has a lot of personality. So it was fun to be able to have these new products to play around with.
Well, and I think that one thing that, when I look at a project like this, it's definitely packaging, right? But for you, is it a blend of illustration and design? Because there's an undeniable design system that exists here that you're using as a leaping off to, hey, they've never been in this packaging before. How do I create those identities? But create consistency among it all. But do you do the plants? Do you pick all that stuff? So you are like literally managing all the assets going into it.
Yeah, and it's a synthesis of illustration, branding, and then packaging is where, and illustration. Packaging is where it all comes together. So yeah, I love projects like this.
Another brand that you've worked with since their inception, right, is Yokota.
Yep.
Yeah. Take us through a little bit about the involvement there and the work behind it. It's just super fun. You're wearing this shirt.
It's super fun. Yeah, I'm wearing the Trippy Grizzly. So Justin Fuller, my former boss, created Yokota a few years back. And so I'm not the only artist that has done work for them by a long shot. But since we had years working together, it's always really easy for Justin to hit me up with, hey, I want this thing. Like the Ripple graphic, that was just an idea that he had. I've never done lettering in that style before, but I've always wanted to. So it's easy for us to get into projects really quickly. Like we don't really need that intro time. Yeah, with new clients, we can just hit the ground running. So everything here except Trippy Grizzly was a project that was pretty quick and easy to turn around. We still go through revisions and change things up. And I'd say the most fun thing for me was the camouflage, the hat.
This pattern hat down here?
Yeah, that's a custom camouflage where I had this idea that we could create camouflage based on topographic lines. So then I asked Justin, what's a region in Colorado that has a fly fishing tie-in? And so I dug up U.S. Forest Service maps from that area, picked the shapes that I wanted to work with, and then I built that camouflage from that. So again, there's that cool backstory where you don't have to know that it's based on topography even to think that it's a cool
texture pattern.
But everything is I think, more enjoyable when there's a backstory like that.
Well, and it's funny because, you mentioned, it seems like a lot of designers, we're always fascinated by things like flags, right? Like that's the ultimate original brand, right? If you think about it. And then patterns are something that gets you really excited, but your detail and your level of exploration, actually I'm going to leap one. Oh, I don't have it in here, dang it.
I was going to
wanted
say,
to show your other pattern that we were talking about, the one for the pilot. It's not in the deck. But
I was just going to say one last thing here. See the fish? They're facing to the left.
They are, actually. I really need that bear to be just like dripping and animated too at some point. But it was funny. We had an off discussion of camo and things like that and topo patterns that you were really like nerding out on. And I think that comes back to that same obsessive quality that you would put into something like the Wes Anderson work. But it also is a funny thing too, is like I always tell people that invention is super hard in design. But if we can go grab an asset or something that we have a structure of reality to build on, something that hasn't been seen from, that's the easier way to start it, right? And I don't know if that's like letting the cat out of the bag, but a lot of times it's like, that's the secret sauce, dude. Making up it's really hard.
If you have a process, or like with that camouflage thing, since I was using topography, I didn't just have to create random shapes. I could just co-opt them and then mold them into. It's really hard to make layered, like that has like 3 layers, to make them all work seamlessly in the repeat, but having something to start with where it's like, okay, we're doing topography, I'll go find it and then I'll import it into Illustrator, and at least you have like a plan to move forward.
Well, and then the deeper tie is, it's really cool that it's undeniably Colorado.
And the last thing about that camo is I was able to hide their word mark in it.
Oh, super cool.
So if people are familiar with like popular hunting camouflage, like there's Realtree and
Mossy Oak.
Yeah, they always have their logo, or even like the classic Army camo. It'll have a little logo in it somewhere. So I was like, we should do that with this, because that becomes part of the story too, where it's like they didn't just find a fabric or something. It's bespoke camouflage for Yokota.
Super cool. So we did get a user submitted question, and that was from.
I know who it's going to come from.
And he does want to know, why isn't this done yet? So not only are you doing, but we've covered you doing illustration, you doing really kick-ass design, but also now delving into making your own font.
Yeah.
Take us through a little bit of that learning experience.
It's not done yet because font design is really hard. This is I don't know if you would call it a revival, since it's not based on a existing typeface, but I have, I think, the book here. This project was inspired by a field guide on wildflowers that my ex had gotten from her great aunt. And so she had the book, and I wanted to make a font, and I decided that I wanted to base it on the hand calligraphy of this guy. The example is the page there. So every single illustration has a little Latin caption in his beautiful calligraphy. But my ex didn't want me smashing her book on my scanner to get all my source material, so I found my own copy online. So I scanned in a bunch of hundreds of pages to get kind of like, to make a letter A in the style of his handwriting, I needed like 24 A's because they're each a little bit different.
And find the average of it?
Yeah, so I would always ask, like, for one, this font is basically regular weight. It's not bold. I guess it could be light, but it's pretty much regular, non-italic. And so I was always trying to find his handwriting where it fit that criteria, but then also his A would change every time he wrote it. So I'd be like, what are the little parts of it that I really like and that I think exemplifies his personal style? So after I scanned everything in, I started vectorizing the best versions and tweaking them in Illustrator, and then I copy and paste those into glyphs So the text on the left is the actual font that is typeset. It's live type in Illustrator. So it's coming along. Spacing is pretty hard with some of his characters, like the A, because it's such a weird shape, or the funky G. But I'll get it done at some point.
I think the interesting thing about this is like it starts out as a personal project. You're inspired by something, invigorate it, you get your obsessiveness going, make 1 million scans, work on 50,000 A's. The R is super dope in this too.
Yeah.
But then you're like, I might do this as an offering to my client. I think that's the kind of coolest thing too, of every time you do a personal project, that it does have some, it's a dumb word to use, but commercial, like application.
Not if it takes me 2 years to make a font, but.
You're telling the client, it's going to be a little bit before we get this one done for you, but I'm on it.
No, at this point I am pretty familiar with glyphs, definitely not a expert, but if a client just needed an all caps basic alphabet without all the accents and special figures and stuff, I would feel confident that I could knock that out pretty quickly. Especially like, this is a personal project. No one's forcing me to ever finish it.
Right.
Whereas if it's a client project, I have to do it. So.
But back to that nature of like just having to get it out. Is this out enough that it's kind of okay? It's the dusty car in the garage that you know at some point you're going to get back to. And like, you got enough of it done, or like what happens? Like.
What's the question here?
The question is like, when does it get done? Because isn't that the checkbox that we as creatives always love?
It'll get done.
You're like, stop pressuring me, man. This was an awesome one too. I thought that was really fun because like, I think you got commissioned to do packaging, and then you happened to do the van.
Yep. No, I never knew the van.
The van experience.
So this started with packaging, the pints, which there are 8 of them now in Whole Foods. You can go out and get this. It's vegan ice cream, and at the time that I took on this client, she was doing on-site sales, but it was a Vespa scooter with a refrigerator attached to it. Well, small. It was like a side. It was like
it's like one of those like
a freezer
big
box.
chills, you know, and she's like speeding all over.
It was badass. She got it custom made. It was a refrigerated freezer box that was in the position of a sidecar, and she would scoot to Longmont and Boulder Farmers Market. That's kind of how she got her foot in the door. And then something I really like doing with clients is showing up for them when they've hired me to, like, paid me lots of money to do stuff. She had a Kickstarter for this bus. She was basically committed to buying it, but she had a Kickstarter to make it. It was a USPS delivery.
Oh, no way.
So obviously you got to add electrical stuff and refrigeration, and then the vinyl wrap, which was done by Husky Signs locally. So that, for me, that was a nice opportunity to contribute to her Kickstarter. And then I think I gave her maybe 8 concepts-ish. I did try a lot of stuff because this is basically a packaging project, but you know, four unique sides, and
I think this is a branding project, really, because like now
it's everything.
Yeah.
And the driver's side has a different function than the customer side. So on the other side of the van, the logo is huge. It's on the entire side. And a fun little thing I came up with was, since she's the one who drives it, I gave a little treatment like a World War II fighter, where she has her name on the door right under the.
Super cool. Like
so
right
like
under the window.
you can like see her and be like, oh, that's Helen.
Yeah. Captain Helen.
But yeah, the truck has taken on a life of its own. The truck is ultimately the logo at this point, where she's obsessed with the truck and she has stickers for sale that are the truck. She calls the truck Bestie. And I think people think of the brand through the truck, yeah.
I think it's so cool that they carried it down to the license plate too, as like
Yeah.
one of the core brand
She's
values.
committed, yeah.
That's all right, so if there was one thing you knew now that you wish you knew, but way back when, what would it be when you got started?
Something that I definitely feel I've gotten better at is just client management. Sometimes you got to terminate a project, and when I was younger in my career, I definitely did not know how to do it gracefully. Because you can do it where you just drop the hammer, but I think that at this point in my career, I'm really invested in always making a calculated decision when it comes to that kind of thing. So I did terminate a project a few months ago where the client was micromanaging it and would take way too long to get back to me. So the project was just like, it should have been like a 2-month thing, and at that rate, it would have been like a 6-month thing. So I wrote a really respectful email where I just said, I don't think my studio is the best fit for the project. And I could have been way more honest, but there's nothing to gain from that. So, and it comes with experience. I couldn't have known how to handle something like that gracefully earlier on, and I guess it kind of speaks to the soft skills of design, where even just getting older in life, like you get more mature, you get more interpersonal skills, and that stuff is really valuable in the design world to build relationships, maintain relationships.
But also knowing where you draw that line is so important. What's that look like for you? Is it a monetary walk away? Is it do you get some compensation up front? What's the and it's probably different case to case, but does it give you some assets? Hey, have where we're at.
Yep. In that case,
good luck.
So that there was another lesson in that project where that client was very cagey from the get-go. I wanted to win the work because the project would have been really fun, but they said that phrase, which should be your walk-away red flag of what if I don't like it at the end and I spend all this money. So I structured it a little different in this case, where I was like, here's what I can do. I can charge less and give you a presentation of concepts. And I was very clear, meaning you're not getting any artwork. I'll just do an exploration and show you how I would do the project. And he still tried to get the assets at the end of it. But so I saved myself some pain, because the final delivery was like, here, you have a PDF. And I was like, these are your ideas. You can go have someone else do them. That's fine with me. And I kept all the artwork. And so it's definitely not what I would have wanted, but I think that at least I saved myself some pain by setting it up in a way where I didn't give a bunch of stuff away, and I did still get paid.
Right.
Like I quoted him a fee for the presentation. So, I mean, it's really not like a worst case scenario, other than losing a project that I wanted to actually do.
Well, it is a funny thing when you pay attention to those things, whether you call it some red lights come on. I always call it, the oil light was on early in this one. And, but it like simple things, like we can't seem to get on a calendar together.
Yeah.
Like that is an indicator of what it's going to be like, down the thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Where and it's really hard to say to a client, I need you to be more prompt, because it sounds so demanding and almost like mean, because some people are just like more casual people.
Right.
But yeah, that was like a big thing. Like if I can't get a clear answer, then I'm not going to be able to succeed in the project. So.
Well, amazing work. Thanks for taking us through it.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate the time. Really good job. And then, like I said, this is a First Friday event. We're back in April with Parisa. Tasha Corey here, and she'll be talking about design. She's helping students do some of these political posters in the windows and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to that talk too. So we hope to see you guys here next month. Thanks again.
Thank you.